Hi, sir. Thank you so much for speaking to Moneycontrol. You've been talking about a lot in terms of the political consensus required among political parties on key economic issues. What, according to you, are those priority areas?
So, obviously, India has had very good growth, right? So, for us, it is necessary that we continue to have a high rate of growth and also that it be an inclusive growth. So, to facilitate and make that happen, I think it is important for us that we are looking at, let us say, approximately 3 to 4 broad points. First and foremost is the big ticket reforms, as we call it, which is the land, labor, and obviously the effect on the agriculture side of it. But to make it happen, we believe that there has to be a consensus built up across the states and in terms of acceptance for this. And we are actually suggesting like a GST type of a federal structure to make that happen and make these big ticket reforms happen, because that will what will facilitate India's rate of growth at the same pace or even further higher as we go into the future. Sorry, I had two other points which I want to add. Yeah. The second is the focus on the MSMEs. So for that, I think there are three elements again there. One is to support them for getting access to formal credit and the right set of funding. So similarly, like what was done with the ECGLS scheme, to create a fund for them, which is enabling them access that support, but equally get a rating done which is specific for MSMEs and the sectors which they cover, so that they can access that. Similarly, to support their green transition and also the digital transition. So if you provide this, I think it will help MSMEs scale up faster and become part of the global supply chains. The third element is the spend on the education and health care. So there we are speaking about a gradual progression to go up to 6% of GDP for education and 3% on healthcare. And last but not the least is the focus on employment. So therefore we are talking about, like a PLI scheme, an employment linked incentive plan, which will cover sectors like tourism, healthcare, hospitality, logistics. So all of it really generate employment in a large way. So it is not the money invested, but it is the employment generation which these sectors will provide for.
So another leg of the discussion has been about the performance, at least the economic performance of the current government in the 10 years that they have been in power. Just wanted to understand what, according to you, would be the biggest achievements in the last 10 years. But I'd also like to understand, the government is probably, coming up with a 100-day agenda if they come back to power. So the priorities there as well.
So I think if you look at today, India is very much part of the global economy, well recognized and in the world stage, part of the global supply chains. So it is not just one change which has happened, or many steps have been taken. Especially post-COVID, if you really look at it, the way in which India has managed and also come out of COVID, and also the rapid transition is, I think, a very big step. There are three elements which have facilitated this. It is infrastructure, and within infrastructure, it is physical infrastructure, which obviously we see at the ground level. The second is the digital public infrastructure, and the usage of the digital public infrastructure by both businesses, and I would call it the direct benefit which has been given to the common man. And last but not the least, the social infrastructure. So all of it coming together is what has really helped position India today in the world stage and well accepted as not just the economy to be investing in, but also work with because it has got a huge domestic demand. Coming to the 100-day agenda, I think the points which I mentioned earlier are the ones which are relevant, and obviously many of those may not be able to be finished within 100 days. The only other element I will add to that would be maybe the GST rationalization, which we have been speaking about, and how do we really look at that as being able to be implemented. Again, it will require the consensus which we spoke about.
Just trying to understand, sir, one of the key things that India Inc. is really involved in is trying to bring up private capital expenditure, right? And the government has been on the forefront of this. We've seen record budget allocations. When do we really see the private sector taking that baton from the government?
So I think it is important to first look at it, the facts at the ground level. So if you look at the total capex spend, I think industry or private sector had been doing anywhere between 36 to 37% in 21-22 until 23. So if you look at 24, the data is still not out. Our belief is that we'll be in the same percentage. So it is not that capex is not happening, but the rate of growth you have seen on the government capex is far higher, and therefore industry has maybe a leg room to catch up or elbow room to catch up. But having said that, if I step back and look at what our member survey actually show, we are now speaking about almost all sectors in excess of 75% capacity utilization. And sectors like cement, steel, auto, etc. are already in 90% capacity utilization. So if I look at that, and also the feedback we have got from members is that compared with H2 of FY24, H1 of FY25, they are going to have growth. So if I overlay this kind of capacity utilization with the growth expected in H1, my belief is that it will continue to have or continue to be a growth in private sector investments going forward. And in a way, I would call it that we are ready to make the investment, they are pregnant, but the delivery will take place soon. The last bit is with regard to the ability to actually, or rather stepping back, if you look at it, what has been the challenge why it has not been happening is because obviously there have been a lot of uncertainties in the global world. So as people look at it, productivity improvement is something which people first do, then coming into spend on the capex.
Since you talked about the global environment, I mean, just a straight question on two very important metrics. One is, where do you see growth going? Adding to that, India has been doing extremely well on the real GDP front. We are the fastest growing economy in the world. How long can we sustain this? There are a lot of global difficulties. There is an impending recession. There is also the Red Sea crisis. We're seeing a lot of conflict situations. And secondly, where do you see inflation? I mean, the US CPI data yesterday came in hotter than expected, and that has kind of receded expectations of a rate cut this year at all from the US Fed. That obviously has a bearing on India's Reserve Bank of India. So where do we see all of this growth and inflation taking us?
Actually, your question itself, I think you have given me all the points which I would have covered in my answer. But having said that, let me elaborate that in a proper manner. So you are right. I think the biggest challenge which we see as Indian industry is from geopolitical challenges, is from what's going to happen in the rest of the world with the commodity prices thanks to inflation. And as you know, I think there was a huge spike earlier. I think we believe that kind of a spike is being corrected. But still, the fact remains that inflation is going to have, global inflation is going to have a negative impact on India. So that is the first factor which we will need to watch out for, and we obviously will continue to work with the government to see how we can support that. The second issue is with regard to the sudden geopolitical issues like the Houthi crisis or any of the other issues which arise. So if they happen, that's something which, obviously we will try to plan for it, but beyond a level you can't be prepared for certain such kind of a situations. These are, in fact, I would call it the large challenges, and the kind of the environment we are in today is something we need to be prepared for, and that can be an implement for our growth story. From a domestic side of it, I think other than the monsoon, we don't really see big impediments or big challenges from our growth. So for us, it is all about watching what's going to happen there and be prepared for it. But having said that, I think we are, I would call it optimistic about FY25. As we speak today, our view is our growth will be in excess of 7.6%. Of course, last year we had projected our rate of growth, which we had talked about. I think we are now ending up with a much higher percentage. So maybe we are a little bit conservative. But as we speak today, we are looking at more than 7.6% rate of growth. We do believe that all the support which has happened from an infrastructure side, and as I said, the positioning of India on the world stage will actually help us grow and reach that target.
So moving a bit on to political economy, the main opposition party in their manifesto talked about a wealth redistribution plan. That has obviously garnered a lot of reactions. We just want to understand on a fundamental, on a very macroeconomy level, does it make sense in a country like India where we do see inequality? We do know that there are numbers out there where 1 or 2% of the population does have a majority of the wealth. And the second thing is, if not something like a wealth redistribution plan, there have been talks about a wealth tax also in the past. So what are your thoughts on this?
No, I think CII has been very clear that if you really look at growth, it has to be inclusive. And as we look at growth across all parameters, you want every sector to grow, you want opportunities for growth to be made available across the board. So I think the right way to address this is to have growth across all sectors rather than look at only one benefit or one area is getting benefited from. Our position has been, and I think I mentioned to you already, supporting the MSMEs in the right manner for them to be able to grow, supporting or rather I haven't mentioned that, so let me add about making sure we are working and skilling the talent available to be able to give them the right jobs. And let us also not forget that the aspirations of India have significantly changed. So you will have to prepare for those aspirations and the way in which growth is looked at. So for us it is all about growth and inclusive growth, and that's how we look at it. It is not about one sector versus the other. And I think it's wrong to look at one sector versus other. It's all inclusive growth.
No specific observation on a wealth distribution plan as
No, I think it is, as I said, it is growth for all rather than wealth distribution.
Coming to one more thing that has garnered a lot of debate is the electoral bonds issue. I mean, we understand that, overall it's just a decision that has come and things have happened as per the law and order. What I actually want to understand from CII's perspective is that there have been some donations where concerns were raised that some companies have profits or earnings much lower than what has been donated. Some of that data has emerged. I just want to understand from you that overall, in terms of corporate governance, how important is, looking into a situation like this?
See, CII stands for transparency. CII believes that corporate governance is very important. So I think we don't have any views on that. I mean, obviously, as an industry body, we support transparency and fairness.
And the last one or two questions I had, one would be on your outlook on the stock market. Obviously, again, with regard to the stock market, also the volatility comes from global issues. So how do you see that playing? Because we also have the added risk of a heat wave this year, more number of hotter days than before, which has been the case for the last few years. So how do you see that?
So, I mean, see, the stock markets tend to reflect what is happening from a future growth perspective. And I think we had the SEBI chairperson in one of our events very recently when she mentioned that the reflection of our growth is what we actually see in the stock. So if we look at from what we need to do, I think it is important we continue to grow and we address all the issues which can support that growth. And that helps economy, that helps stock market, that helps all of that happen. So we don't look at the stock market, we look at facilitating that growth happen, and then that plays out automatically from a stock market perspective.
My last question is if there's one policy that you'd really like the next government to take up at the priority, maybe like the first policy on their 100-day agenda, and one policy or one practice or measure that you would like to see go. I mean, someone would probably say, an agriculture economist could say, export bans maybe. So, your answer on these two metrics.
No, I think, see, we should not be really looking at this in an ad hoc fashion, right? So the 4 or 5 points which I mentioned to you are the ones which we should be looking at. For specific policy changes, I think that's a continuous process. So I would not really look at a 100-day agenda for that. I would look at the implementation of all of these as really making the change and the difference for India and for Indian growth story, and to make that really happen.
And one practice, do you think that, we should leave it in the past?
Practice?
Or a measure? Or
no, that's why I said then that becomes very specific for me to say, don't do this or don't do that, which anyway we will be representing,
sure,
when we talk about issues. So I would not like to look at it in that manner.
So overall, your outlook is positive for the Indian
Very much
economy.
positive. As I said, we are looking at this as being the perfect opportunity for India to scale up its growth.
One last question. I'm sorry I'm adding one, but this would be my final one. What do you think the Indian voter today keeps in mind when they vote? The top agenda in their mind? Because we are a few days away from the first phase kicking in.
I mean, I wouldn't know what the feedback from the Indian voter would be, but I guess it is all about, making their lives better. That's how they look at it.
Oh, thank you so much for speaking to us, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.